When I was a kid, I really wasn't all that into video games. I mean, I had some Nintendo handhelds, but I really wouldn't have considered myself a gamer, just someone who occasionally played games. I didn't play a lot of the classic games that people my age all grew up with. I never got into Call of Duty, never played Banjo-Kazooie or any of the Legend of Zelda games. Final Fantasy VII? What is that? I don't know what that is. Of course, this did change, and it was due in large part to the release of a small indie game, maybe you've heard of it, Minecraft. Minecraft introduced a young me to the world of PC gaming. I loved Minecraft, and I played it constantly with my friends. Those same friends eventually got me into other games like Team Fortress 2, Terraria, and... I know, some of you are groaning already. Here we go. Another YouTuber comparing Starfield to Bethesda's older work and talking about how they fell off. Now, I'm actually with you on that. I'd rather evaluate Starfield by itself rather than as a comparison to other games, and I am going to do that. But there's some important context I need to share with you here, which will lay the groundwork for what I want to talk about today, so bear with me for a minute. Skyrim felt like magic to me. I had never experienced such an expansive world filled with characters and quests. I spent hours doing mundane activities like leveling my smithing skill. I would go into Dwemer ruins and cart out all the metal bit by bit just so I could make a bunch of dwarven bows. I sank hundreds of hours into the game and considered it to be my favorite game for years afterwards. Even now, more than 10 years later, I go back and do a playthrough here and there just to scratch some itch. Of course, a lot of things have changed in that time too. While Skyrim still holds a special place in my heart for what it represents for me as a gamer, it's not my favorite game anymore. I've played a lot of games over the years that have molded what I look for in games and helped me to form opinions on what makes a game good. So when Starfield came out last year, I wasn't very excited about it. After seeing how Bethesda handled Fallout 76, I had very little faith in them as a company. So when I talk about this game, I want you to know that I went into it with pretty low expectations. I was expecting a mediocre experience that would be mildly fun for a couple dozen hours. But even with expectations like that, Bethesda found a way to let me down. How did you do that, Todd? Horrible skill trees and progression, mediocre gunplay, laughably bad exploration mechanics, and even more laughably bad writing left me frequently baffled at how a developer with such a history could have shat out this stinker. And yet at the same time, the entire time I was playing, I was left with one really strange feeling. The feeling that I would have loved this game when I was younger. If I played Starfield at the same time I played Skyrim, I feel like it would be just as beloved to me today. And that made me wonder, are my expectations the problem? Have we, as the gaming community, become so demanding of developers that they can't make games we'll enjoy anymore? Well, the short answer is no, of course not. Starfield came out in 2023. It shared its release year with incredible games like Baldur's Gate 3, Armored Core 6, Tears of the Kingdom, Forspoken. You guys remember that one? You remember Forspoken? Dread it, run from it, Forspoken arrives, all the same.
Yeah, okay, that is something I do know.
Honestly, as trashy as Forspoken is, I would take that hilariously bad dialogue over the mind-numbing dialogue in Starfield, because at least then I have something to laugh at. The question that I want to ask today is, what changed? Why don't I like Starfield? Why did the gaming community turn against Starfield? How did Bethesda fail while doing virtually the same thing they've always done? Before I get into this, I want to mention that Bethesda started updating Starfield while I was working on this script, so this video is based on pre-update Starfield, and I will talk about the updates they've made at the end. Starfield is an action-adventure role-playing game developed by Bethesda Game Studios, a video game developer headed by the one and only Todd Howard. Starfield is set in a science fiction universe set far in the future where Earth had to be abandoned and mankind escaped to the stars. You play a deep space miner on their first day working on a moon, that is, until you touch a funny rock and your fate is changed forever. That sounds like an oversimplification, but it isn't. After you touch the funny rock, you wake up in the med bay where you create your character. Here you get to decide what your character looks like, but you also get to choose their background information, which determines your skills and your character's traits, which offer role-playing choices and miscellaneous benefits for your character. The backgrounds are pretty straightforward. It just determines which skills you want to start with, whether you want to be particularly good with guns or better at crafting, etc., etc. What's more interesting is the traits, which could radically change how you play the game from the get-go. Some of the more interesting ones are the allegiance choices. There are 3 major religious beliefs in the Starfield universe: Enlightened, Universal, and House of Arun, who worship a big snake. How fun! The Enlightened and Universal choices both give you access to a special chest in their respective churches, while the big snake gives you a buff for grav jumping, but a debuff if you don't jump for a while. Grav jumping is when you pilot your ship between systems. Sounds pretty cool, right? You're making a decision that will give you some benefit while locking you out of something else. It makes your decision impactful. It gives your choice meaning. But spoiler alert, it's pretty meaningless. I chose the Raise Universal trait for my character because I wanted the free loot that came with being a good Christian boy, but the chest you get is just complete garbage. You get a bunch of religious textbooks, some med packs that aren't hard to come by, some buffing medicine, some useless clothes, and orange juice. Who doesn't like some orange juice? So the promised reward of this trait is just a massive disappointment. It's a bunch of crap that isn't even useful at the beginning of the game. The other big change is that you get special dialogue options in certain situations that are related to your traits. We'll talk about this more later when we discuss dialogue, but the extra choices just aren't that impactful. This is a trend that we're going to talk about a lot. Starfield is a role-playing game, at least it was marketed as one, and generally with role-playing games, you're meant to have a new and unique experience with each playthrough, which Starfield was also marketed as having. The problem with Starfield is that you aren't actually having a unique experience. Bethesda has just created the illusion of unique experience with things like traits that sound like they're going to have a big impact on your playthrough, but they're actually so minor that they're barely noticeable. Choosing a certain religious alignment does not lock you out of certain activities or grant you access to things that you wouldn't get otherwise. It does virtually nothing. You get orange juice. I also chose the introvert trait, which gives you more oxygen when you're alone and less when you have companions. Since I chose this trait, that means I must have noticed the difference in my oxygen levels when I had a companion because it was such an impactful difference, right? No, it doesn't really make much of a difference at all. There was not a single time that it even registered as impacting me throughout my entire playthrough. I never even thought about it. The last trait I chose was the Wanted trait, which makes bounty hunters occasionally come after me, but the trade-off is that I get increased damage when I'm at low health. Now this one is super confusing because this game has a crime system where if you commit a crime, you get a bounty, and the police will come after you and arrest you or kill you. However, the bounty you get with the Wanted trait isn't tied to any of the factions in the game. You aren't seen as a criminal for having it, and you can't get arrested for it. To me, this suggests that the bounty on your head is a private bounty put in place by a private individual or organization. Sounds like the setup for an interesting quest line where you can investigate where the bounty came from and take out the individual that gave it to you and clear said bounty while keeping the buff you get. Right? Well, see, the problem is, if Bethesda did that, some players would get to see that cool questline, but not all of them, and that's not fair. Why should you get to have a unique and interesting experience during your playthrough? So instead, you just permanently have an anomalous bounty on your head. It's pretty annoying being hunted by bounty hunters constantly, but don't worry, Bethesda thought of that. You can actually remove the Wanted trait by talking to a certain NPC and paying 3,000 credits. Now, in case you're not familiar with Starfield's economy, 3,000 credits is fucking nothing! The dozens of bounty hunter ships I shot down are worth 10 times that amount. I had more credits than that less than 2 hours into the game. Why am I being permanently hounded by bounty hunters for a bounty that is worth as much as a child's pocket change? Just like the Wanted trait, every single trait in the game can be removed somehow. This is another trend we're going to see with Starfield. God forbid you face consequences for your decisions. Why don't you even play a game like that? I chose to build my character with some inconvenient traits, my own decision. And you expect me to live with that? Games shouldn't engage players. Just let me disable anything I find annoying. Thank you, Todd. The worst part is that Todd treats this like a good thing.
We have a way in the game, kind of an activity or quest you can do to remove that trait, as opposed to, don't like my character, I want to start over. Each of them are something like that you can solve that removes the entire trait for the rest of your playthrough.
The fictional questline I invented to find the source of your bounty would allow you to get rid of it, but it would engage the player by giving them a unique experience as a part of that process. And at the end of it, you would keep the buff that boosts your damage when you're at low health. So the choice to give yourself that trait would still be impactful. In Bethesda's version, the traits are essentially optional since they can all be removed with ease and any impact they might have will go with them, which just goes to show how little they actually matter as a part of this experience. The traits you choose are not experience-altering decisions that will change how you play the game and interact with the world. They're minor, mostly meaningless buffs and debuffs. So the question becomes, why did Bethesda include them at all if they matter so little? Well, I have a theory. Again, this game is marketed as an RPG, and Bethesda knows that RPGs tend to have character creation decisions that will radically alter how you play the game. They know that their audience is expecting that kind of experience. So they put stuff like this in to make you think you're getting that experience, while actually giving you something completely different. Something more limited in scope, more linear, more curated. Starfield was marketed as a return to form for Bethesda, back to making the RPGs of old, something more akin to Morrowind. It was PR bullshit. Starfield is not some dynamic, in-depth RPG experience, it's more like an action-adventure game with shallow RPG mechanics. Now, in analyzing video games, I want to analyze what the game is versus what I want it to be, so I'm not going to hold Todd to his embellishments and admonish Starfield for not being the RPG I was expecting. It's fine if you want to make an action-adventure game. I love games like that. This game isn't inherently worse for being that. But regardless of the genre, these traits suck. They lead you to believe they're a more important choice than they actually are, and they add very little to the experience as a whole. I should feel some level of excitement when the traits I chose benefit me in some way, or I should find myself wishing I chose certain traits at certain points in the game because that means that decision was impactful and gave me a unique experience. In reality, their fluff choices made to make you feel like you have more agency than you do. So to recap, I chose the introvert, raise universal, and wanted traits for my character. In terms of skills, I chose the cyber runner background, which gave me a head start in stealth, security, and theft. Stealth makes it harder for enemies to notice you, security lets you hack more advanced systems, and theft lets you pickpocket NPCs. I decided to build a stealth-focused character because I had originally played Starfield on stream, and when I did that, I found that I didn't really care for the combat. The problem with Starfield's combat comes down to an issue of engagement. The guns look, sound, and feel good to shoot, but this combat design asks so little from the player. The enemies don't try to avoid you or flank you, they'll just sit there and let you do your thing. And enemy variety? My god, I hope you like fighting the exact same enemy over and over for dozens of hours because there is no variety. There are no tougher enemies that demand more of your attention, no enemies that will force you to keep on the move or stay in cover. It's all just humans with different guns. Oh, but what about the alien creatures? Aren't those different enemies? Captain Mack lied about Starfield! He said there were only human enemies! Yeah, but all the aliens act exactly the same and you never see them in regular combat, just when you're running around on planets. That doesn't really count.
I actually completely forgot about the robots. Oh my god, Twitter's gonna be so mad. I forgot about the robots. Yeah, the robots do add some variety, but only visually. Mechanically, they're the same as fighting the humans, so yes, there are more than just humans, there just aren't mechanically different enemies.
The real issue I ran into was the scaling. While streaming the game, I accidentally ended up doing some higher level quests and facing higher level enemies, which meant they had much larger health bars and dealt more damage. So I ended up in a situation where I was just dumping bullets into enemies and watching their health bars slowly tick down. It isn't engaging to stand in one spot and whittle down a tanky enemy. It isn't fun. But when you're facing enemies that are at your level, they're so little of a threat that there's no reason to use cover or keep moving. You're either taking everything down with ease or sitting still and shooting a sponge, and no matter what, it isn't engaging. You don't have to use your brain or really try at all in combat, just point and shoot. For reference, I played on the normal difficulty, and some people are going to respond to that by telling me to play on a higher difficulty. But the problem with that is that Bethesda doesn't know how to design difficulty. When I think of difficulty, I think of systems that challenge the player in unique ways. You know the player is going to get used to how your game is played, so you can gradually introduce enemies that demand more from them, or mechanics that require them to be more considered in how they approach the situation. Bethesda's version of difficulty is just to give the enemy more health and make them deal more damage. I turned the difficulty up at one point, and yeah, it just gave everything a bigger health bar. This was especially annoying while I was playing a stealth build where the idea is to take everything down in a shot or two. A higher difficulty doesn't create a more difficult experience in Starfield, it creates a more tedious one. Tedium does not equal engagement. Certainly you shouldn't expect an RPG like Starfield with gunplay in it to be able to match the quality of the gunplay in a combat-focused game, but if a game chooses to do something and does it poorly, it warrants criticism. Especially when it doesn't do anything else particularly well either. Regardless of Starfield's genre, this combat is undoubtedly lackluster. So since I found out the combat was poopy dungo on stream, I opted to go for a stealth build on my footage playthrough. I figured I would rather just take out enemies with one headshot from the shadows rather than engage in a firefight with them. Lastly, there's an option to choose your character's pronouns. This takes 2 seconds and hurts absolutely no one to include. You know what else takes 2 seconds and hurts no one? Yeah, that's right, pressing the like button. I knew you knew it. You're smart like that. I finished my character and named them Fun Game, hoping it would influence my experience, but I think we all know how that went. After sorting out my health situation, a man named Barrett landed on the moon to speak with me about my experience. It turns out that I'm the only one that saw visions after touching the rock. Everyone else can handle it like normal. Barrett explains that he's a member of a group of explorers called Constellation who are researching the funny rock I dug up. He calls it an artifact. I'm going to keep calling it a funny rock. Barrett gave me his ship and an annoying robot that faded into existence because designing video games is hard, and told me to head for New Atlantis, where Constellation is headquartered. And wow, this robot is super annoying. It has this awkward, extremely slow manner of speech that is just tiring to listen to.
I appreciate you verifying my analysis.
Needless to say, I did not travel with this walking trash can any longer than I needed to. Unfortunately, it tried to talk to me every time I came near it.
I hope you are satisfied. Constellation has suffered losses before. I am at your service, Captain.
I wish I could melt this text-to-speech generator down and jettison the ingot out into space. On my way back to New Atlantis, the fax machine insisted that we find the home base of some pirates that were attacking us. This serves as a sort of combat and dungeon tutorial. Once I encountered the pirate leader, I got the opportunity to try out the Persuasion system for the first time. In dialogue, you occasionally get to play a little mini game where you can try to persuade the person you're talking to. This is a system that I invested a lot of time into throughout the game because succeeding a persuasion check can often allow you to avoid combat altogether. And since I didn't like the combat, I tried to do that as much as possible. This persuasion system is not very good. Okay, so how it works is that you're given a few different dialogue options. They're each assigned a point value and a color, green, yellow, and red. The colors represent how likely the option is to succeed, and the point value is how many points you'll get on success. Each persuasion takes a certain number of points to succeed. During the persuasion, you get 3 turns to get enough points to succeed. If you need 8 points but you only get 6, you fail to persuade them. This is what incentivizes you to attempt higher risk options that are worth more points. There is a way to get more than 3 turns. If you're on your last turn but you succeed with the line you chose, you get an extra turn. I like this a lot because it would be really awkward if you succeeded and lost anyway because you didn't have enough points. So you only fail the persuasion if you're on your last turn and you fail the check. Now, as for why the system isn't very good, well, for starters, you aren't really given enough information to make good decisions. We know that yellow dialogue options are less likely to succeed than green ones, but by how much? What do these colors represent? What's the percentage? There's also a hidden additional percentage difference that the game isn't telling you about. Sometimes you'll get 2 green dialogue options, and that means they're both just as likely to succeed, right? Well, no, one of these options will appeal better to the person you're talking to, making it more likely to succeed. So I'll give Bethesda some credit here. It's great that knowing the personality of the person you're talking to and knowing what will resonate with them can help you with persuasion. But this also sucks because there's a chance that the appropriate dialogue option will fail anyway because at the end of the day, it's still just a random dice roll. I'm actually not 100% certain that some dialogue options work better than others. It's just my theory after engaging with the system a lot. I think it's true because there was enough situations where it worked, but since it doesn't work every time, I can't be certain. If Bethesda wants to commit to this random chance system, they should at least go all the way and tell you exactly what the odds are. I understand that it takes some of the thinking out of the equation, but it's better than trying to be considerate of your choices, only to fail anyway because of some hidden force completely out of your sight. And just to add insult to injury, occasionally you'll critically succeed, instantly ending the persuasion regardless of how many points you have or what direction the conversation was heading towards. This is just awful. It feels so video gamey. I could be talking to someone who is totally against whatever I want from them, but instantly change their mind because look at me, I'm just so charming. Who could say no to me? Must be all the OJ I've been drinking. This leads into another issue with the system. The persuasion dialogue is so goddamn awkward. Every persuasion has like 2 or 3 lines that the person you're talking to will respond to properly, but after that, it turns into a bunch of generic statements that they'll respond to vaguely.
Don't bullshit me, Constellation. So what? By morning tomorrow, we're gone anyway. I hear you. I'm still willing to talk. You don't know what you're talking about.
There's also the issue that the conversation you have frequently doesn't match the result you end up with. The vague statements that Bethesda wrote sound like the person is getting ready to turn you down, only to change their mind last second. Take this example where I'm trying to convince a club to provide me extra security.
Sorry, but I can't. Look, I'd like to help, but... well, I think we can certainly offer a discounted rate for you.
That guy was totally about to tell me to fuck off. But he ends up helping me out because I won the minigame. I mentioned a minute ago that I find this very video gamey, and what I mean is that there are a lot of systems and moments in this game that don't really make sense outside of the context of this is a video game and this is something that happens in video games. I'm sure some people will respond to that by saying that this is a video game. What did I expect? Well, basically, it comes down to an issue of suspension of disbelief. The suspension of disbelief is when you, as a consumer of some piece of media, whether it be books, movies, anime, or video games, ignore critical thinking for the sake of enjoying that piece of media. An example is something like explosions in a Star Wars movie. Logically speaking, space is a vacuum, and sound doesn't travel through a vacuum, so you shouldn't be able to hear the Death Star exploding. But that's not something you think about when you're watching Star Wars because it wouldn't be very entertaining if you couldn't hear anything that was happening. So that disbelief gets suspended for the sake of your enjoyment. Video games rely on suspension of disbelief a lot, and that's not a bad thing. But suspension of disbelief doesn't come for free. It's earned. You need to be able to convince your audience to suspend their disbelief. If you've done a good job, they won't think about the flaws in logic you're presenting to them because you'll be so engrossed in what you're showing them. In the case of Starfield's Persuasion system, Bethesda hasn't done anything to convince you to suspend your disbelief. They're expecting you to accept it because it's a video game. They aren't trying to convince you that this makes sense, they're expecting you to ignore that it doesn't. And I'm sorry, but it didn't work on me. Rather than pulling me into their world and engrossing me in it, this sloppy shit pulls me out of it and makes it less believable. And the more I get pulled out of this experience, the more the cracks in its facade become apparent. So when I say that this feels video gamey, it means that the game failed to suspend my disbelief and left me feeling like it only makes sense in the context of a video game. If they just made sure that the awkwardly vague dialogue matched the results of the conversation, it would have gone a long way to suspending my disbelief. And don't take this to mean that I think video games should be realistic all the time. Realism doesn't equal fun in video games. But when you're dealing with human beings in a game, it's less about realism and more about how they respond. You do want them to act realistically because that means they will respond appropriately. And when you get an appropriate response, you can feel the impact you're having on the world around you. Ultimately, I just don't like this system. I use it a lot throughout the game, and to Bethesda's credit, it's pretty much the most useful skill in the game. There are a lot of times that persuading someone allowed me to skip over something tedious or led to a more favorable outcome, but this little minigame just doesn't work very well. A more traditional dialogue system where you have to choose the right dialogue choice to get the outcome you want, and if you have a higher persuasion skill, you get access to more persuasive lines, would have worked much better. It's not very good for replay value, as on repeat playthroughs you might just know the right decisions to choose, but it's more engaging in the first playthrough because you have to think about what you're choosing instead of trying to meet some arbitrary point value. And besides, Bethesda did not design this game for multiple playthroughs anyway, and we'll get to that later. Anyway, I failed the persuasion check with the pirates and killed them all. Half a dozen professional pirates versus an industrial printer and an untrained coal miner, and somehow they lost. Should have been hitting the OJ, pirates are known for getting scurvy. With this inconvenience out of the way, I headed for New Atlantis, one of the major settlements in the Starfield universe and the home base of Constellation. And wow, what a city! I can feel the future! Oh wait, this is the wrong one? This is... Can we get the right one on screen, please? Oh my! Look at it! Look at its majesty! It looks like an Unreal Engine 3 demo video. Except that would probably look better.
The water is quite aesthetically pleasing, or so Barrett has told me.
Discussing Starfield's visuals is difficult because it's kind of a mixed bag. Some parts of the game look great while others are just awful, so we're gonna kind of take it location by location throughout the video. New Atlantis undoubtedly looks awful. The architecture is like someone vomited futuristic concept art all over the place. The water is decidedly not aesthetically pleasing. I don't even need to bring up any other games as a point of comparison. It's not even remotely difficult to find games that render water better, especially if we look at releases from the same year as Starfield. But maybe that would be unfair since this entire game seems to have time traveled from 2015. Bethesda made the rather confused design choice of having New Atlantis look like an AI-generated utopian city, while also having random plant life taking over. Vines hang from buildings, grass is cracking up through the sidewalk. It feels like two entirely different design concepts are clashing together. There's also an entire underground section to the city where everything seems way more rundown and shoddy. In a different game, this would be used to make some statement about the inequality between the rich and the poor. It might even contribute to some questline or the overall story of the game, but not in Starfield. In Starfield, it's just kind of like this for some reason. One of the biggest issues that New Atlantis has is an issue that extends to the entire game. I'm gonna play you a clip real quick, and let's see if you can spot the problem.
How may I serve you?
Buddy, it's coffee. Pick fun, get out of the way, and let us get on with our lives. Yeah.
Did you catch it? In order to give Starfield some cinematic quality, Bethesda made the odd choice of shoving a color filter over every location you go to.
Why is it so blue outside? That's bugging me. Like, it's yellow and then it's blue. It's not even like you're going outside and your eyes are adjusting. It's just a different filter being put over the game. I really dislike that. You're outside, it's America. You go inside, Mexico filter. We're in Mexico now. I crossed the border right there. This is the border between America and Mexico.
Lots of games use visual effects like this, but it's usually done more subtly and better. Here, I feel like I can see the semi-translucent color matte set to multiply. That's a little editing joke for the editors in the chat. And man, in the case of New Atlantis, you can really tell how much Todd loves the Wachowski sisters because everything is fucking green! It gives the whole city this awful, sickly hue. I think the intention was to make the plant life pop by boosting the green colors, but it's tuned way too high. The plants certainly pop more, but it sacrifices everything else in the process. I can take some footage from New Atlantis and color correct it to get rid of some of the green, and it looks so much better without it. Bethesda, this trick you're pulling just isn't helping. Bethesda has a problem building decent cities in their games. They always feel too small, too lifeless, too organized. Starfield is no exception. New Atlantis is supposed to be a capital city in this universe, yet it ends up feeling like a pit stop to somewhere more important. They pumped it full of nameless NPCs, but that doesn't really amend the lifelessness issue because they all just wander around aimlessly. And where's Nazim? You expect me to get invested in a city that doesn't have Nazim?
Do you get to the Cloud District very often? Oh, what am I saying? Of course you don't.
Sometimes these videos come out of foreigners traveling to North Korea and going to basic places like car dealerships or computer labs. But if you pay attention, you can piece together the whole thing as a facade and that everyone in the building has some role to play in maintaining the image.
No one is doing anything. There was no typing, no mouse clicking, nothing. We saw one guy looking at the Google homepage, but he wasn't searching for anything.
This is kind of what it feels like to travel around a Starfield city. No one feels real, nothing feels believable. It all just feels like some act to trick your character. At its most basic level, this is true of every city and every video game, but most developers put more effort into the ruse. They want to immerse you in this space. They want you to feel like the NPCs around you exist whether you're there or not. They want to make it feel like a real space with real people walking through it because that's another way to engage the player. Bethesda tries to do it too, but they're just not very good at it. NPCs stand around awkwardly not doing anything. You'll find a guy standing in place doing nothing only to find out he's waiting for you to talk to him so he can give you a quest. Look at this totally normal group of people sitting down for a lecture. They definitely aren't actors planted to make the city look good. Occasionally you'll overhear a conversation, but the dialogue is written in such an awkward, stilted way.
My partner's had a nasty cold, so I've just been taking care of them for the time being.
That doesn't sound good.
After reaching New Atlantis, I took a walk around and ran into this Daft Punk cosplayer standing around in a cafe. I decided to chat with him, and we had a very normal conversation about how people are always trying to kill each other and how he wants to make sure he comes out on top. Then he ended the conversation and I walked away. I wonder if I'll see him again someday. The washing machine and I headed for Constellation HQ, where I finally got to swap out one chaperone for another. Here you're introduced to some of the members of Constellation, as well as what exactly they are and what your role is going to be now that you're a part of it, whether you like it or not. Constellation is a pretty small group, so I'll give you the download on everyone here. Mateo is a researcher and a religious nut. Him and my character belong to the same church, the Sanctum Universum. Noelle is also a researcher, but her work is more scientific than religious. Walter is the CEO of a big shipbuilding company and Constellation's sugar daddy, and Sarah Morgan is Constellation's leader. There are more members, but we'll meet them later. As soon as you arrive, Sarah asks you where Barrett is, but chills out after you explain what happened. Here's where I started to realize something. Starfield is a universe where cell phones were apparently never invented. There is no long-range communication in this universe. Anytime you want to talk to someone, you have to physically go to their location. It's not entirely unbelievable. Sending communication signals over light years in a timely fashion isn't something we figured out, and it's theoretically impossible, but the fact that it's never addressed is definitely odd. In any case, Barrett couldn't radio ahead about the situation. After you're introduced, they ask you to put the funny rock on a table with 2 other funny rocks, and once you do, they start floating around and assembling in a vague shape in the air. Sarah explains that they're collecting the rocks because they figure they'll lead to something, but this is the first real indication that they're on the right track. Conveniently, as soon as you become a part of the story. Sarah then asks if you're ready to go out there and find more rocks, and tells you that you're a part of this now, a member of Constellation. Whatever that is. Okay, so here's where I started having some major issues how this story is written. Sarah explains that Constellation is a collective of like-minded individuals that are dedicated to exploring the universe and unlocking its mysteries. And you're a member of it now, whether you like it or not. The problem I'm having is that all the dialogue is written to suggest that being a member of Constellation is optional. But your character is not allowed to say, no thanks, I'm good. You guys have fun, I'm gonna go back to mining now. You are a member of Constellation now. It's not a choice, it's a requirement. When I first met Barrett, I asked him why I have to go along with this, and he told me that the funny rock may have messed with my head, and that they don't know what the long-term effects of that might be. Okay, that's a totally valid reason. I need to see where this goes to find out if I'm okay after that pre-rendered cutscene shot through my skull. Legitimately, that's great. That makes perfect sense. This never comes up again, ever, and I'm never given the chance to ask anyone else at Constellation if I'm okay. Barrett told me I might have cosmic brain cancer, yet apparently that doesn't matter. I've gotten some pushback in the past when I talk about this in YouTube shorts. People responded by pointing out that the game isn't going to let you just not do the main story. Of course you're not given the option to say no. Why would Bethesda give you the choice to just say no to the main content of the game? Well, that's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the writing issue. Why are they asking me if I want to join Constellation if there's no option to say no? If there's no option to say no, then don't ask me that question. Create a compelling story reason for why I have to join. Cosmic brain cancer, again, is a great reason, but that wasn't real. It only existed so they could explain why I didn't have a choice at the very beginning of the game. After that, they just expect me to be interested in this adventure. And from a writing perspective, they've done absolutely nothing to catch my interest. You can chalk this up to another issue of suspension of disbelief. One of my Patreon members pointed out that developers can buy a lot of suspension of disbelief by just giving players something that they like. Something that engages their interest so much that they don't focus on the logic behind it too much. I wouldn't be asking why I can't refuse to join Constellation if Bethesda made the proposition of joining Constellation so interesting that the thought of refusing didn't cross my mind. Instead, we have this situation where, once again, Bethesda is expecting my disbelief to be suspended rather than putting in the work to suspend it. They expect that I'm so interested in the vague concept of becoming an explorer that I wouldn't even imagine refusing. All of the dialogue is written with the expectation that I want to be a part of it and that I'm excited by the idea of it. And hey, maybe the character they wrote for me is excited about it, but what if I want to roleplay as someone that isn't interested? I'm not particularly interested because they've shown me no reason to be. They showed me some floating rocks. How exciting. This introduction sequence should have been completely different if this is how they wanted to handle it. Instead of railroading me into fighting some nameless pirates on the most barren rock I've ever had the displeasure of looking at, they should have taken some time to show me the wonders of the universe that are out there. They should have found a reason to fly me around some beautiful planets rich with exploration opportunities, flown me through galaxies and nebulae that set my spirit of adventure on fire. I love space! I watch space documentaries, I watch space YouTubers, I play lots of other space games. I bought Star Citizen of all games. It's not hard to sell me on this stuff. That Bethesda made becoming a space explorer such an unappealing proposition to someone like me is a real feat. I practically had to do it on purpose. I've also seen some people respond to this criticism by saying that your option to say no is simply walking away and doing something else, and no, that's stupid. Abstinence of a choice isn't really a choice, especially if I have the option to walk back 5 in-game years later and decide that I do in fact want to join. That's just pressing pause on the conversation. So to recap what I've been yapping about, Bethesda shouldn't pretend I have an option here if I don't. They should have written some compelling reason for why I don't. Cosmic brain cancer, a threat to the universe that's tied to the funny rocks, confidentiality of the information I've learned about. It's not hard to come up with a reason, but they also have to make sure that that reason is tied to the story and not just a one-off thing that stops existing after the opening sequence. If they wanted to pretend to give you a choice but not actually give you one, then they needed to write it so that I would be so interested in becoming a part of Constellation that I don't question why I don't have a choice. They're assuming I'm interested instead of putting in the work to make me interested. And I'm sorry, Todd, but you assumed incorrectly. Starfield is one of the few games that was so boring to stream that I stopped streaming it.
This game is kind of boring, TBH. Man, I love how it's not even like me not wanting to play the game. You guys don't want me to play the game. You guys are not interested in seeing this game. You're like, play something else, Mac, for the love of God. Hey, Cookie Clicker or Subway Surfer.
I only kept playing because I thought it would be fun to make a video about it. So after I was voluntold to be a part of Constellation, Sarah says she'll tag along for a bit while we hunt down another funny rock. We went to meet with the UC Vanguard, a volunteer police force, and found out that one of the Vanguards has just been flying around with a funny rock in his windshield. We'll talk about the Vanguard more later. There's a nice little quest line for them. We eventually chased down the Vanguard and saved his ass from some mercenaries, and he just gave us the rock as thanks. There's no option to ask him about where he got it from, by the way. We just kind of accept that he had it for some reason. Keep in mind that the first person to touch these rocks, like me, gets that Jimmy Neutron brain blast. So there's someone else out there just walking around with cosmic brain cancer. How come they don't have to join Constellation? We headed back to New Atlantis where I was finally let off the leash. No one following me around anymore. I mean, I could have taken Sarah with me for a bit longer, but I don't really care for companions in games like this. Least of all Bethesda companions with their 1,000-yard stare and lack of shutting the hell up.
Find anything useful?
Always worth checking.
Let's see what's in there.
Best not to leave anything useful behind.
Set aside anything useful and just leave the rest.
Sarah gave me the lowdown on 3 possible quests I could start with. Constellation has some leads on other rocks, and apparently, I am the only person in the building that can go looking for them. I mean, in fairness, I am now unemployed entirely thanks to them, but also, what the fuck is Mateo doing? Have him go do something. I actually decided to ignore Sarah entirely and go do something else. See, while I was fighting the mercs, I picked up a slate that talked about a secret outpost hiding some opportunity, which, while I'm on the subject, what's the deal with the slates? Slates are these little white pieces of tech which seem to exist purely as sci-fi paper. They're like some future age post-it notes. That's literally their only function as far as I can tell. And just, why? What's the logic behind this? This kind of goes back to what I was saying before about there being no long-range communication in this universe. This technology feels wildly outdated for where this universe is supposed to be. We can travel distances of light years in an instant, but we're still passing around glorified scraps of paper to communicate. Sometimes you find slates with voice recordings on them instead of notes, which... Is anyone else tired of the voice memo trope in video games? This is more of a pet peeve than anything else, but I swear BioShock popularized it, everybody ripped it off, and like 2 games found a way to use them well. Starfield isn't one of them. There isn't a logical reason for them to existing other than to convey information to the player, and they're not written to be engaging to listen to. Most of the time, I would listen to them and wonder why the hell the person recording it decided to waste their time making it. Video game developers, please, if you're gonna do the voice recording thing, at least make them interesting. Anyway, I headed to the outpost. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was hidden in a level 30 system, which meant that I was 24 levels underleveled for this area. This is where the scaling issues and general combat design issues really stuck out to me. I ended up going through a dungeon that I was way underleveled for, but it still wasn't particularly difficult, just tedious. I ran out of ammo on several guns because of how much damage I'd have to do to take down enemies. It turned out I had stumbled upon the home base of some legendary anomaly known as the Mantis that would hunt down bad guys throughout the galaxy. Despite being massively underleveled, I eventually tore through all the pirates and robots in my way and reached the main base where I got some high-level armor and a very nice ship for my troubles. This was legitimately a cool reward for doing this. I wore the armor for a long time because it was much better than anything else I could get at my level, and I ended up using the ship throughout the entire game. I changed the piss paint job to something more me, and I upgraded the parts here and there, but it served me really well. This ship also had a reputation for belonging to the Mantis, so sometimes enemies would be afraid of me and run away instead of trying to fight, which was pretty nice. It was a very tedious endeavor to get this stuff, but it ended up being worth it, so props to Bethesda for this one. Wow, I think that's the first bit of real praise I give in this game. How far into the video are we? After this, I had a lot of high-level loot to offload, so I ran around New Atlantis selling everything I could to every vendor in town. And Jesus, I am so tired of Bethesda's backward-ass vendor system. If you're unfamiliar, vendors in Bethesda games only have a limited amount of money at any given time that they can use to buy things off of you. This vendor, for example, always starts with 5,000 credits. If they run out of credits, you obviously can't sell them things anymore. I mean, you can, but they won't be able to pay you. So if you end up with more stuff than you can sell to one vendor, you gotta run around and find more vendors to sell to. I have a few issues with this. Firstly, it's just kind of annoying. This is one of those instances where it's easy to earn suspension of disbelief by just giving the player something that's fun or helpful for them. Obviously, it doesn't make sense for vendors to have infinite money to buy things from you with, but God, I wish they did. What difference does it make? It's not like I can steal the money they have anyway. I'm more than willing to suspend my disbelief here if it means I can offload all my crap quickly and easily. Second, the amount of money these vendors carry is not enough for how much I have to sell. Even early in the game, I would frequently empty their wallets. Now this is a real problem because as the game progresses, the loot you collect becomes more valuable while their wallets do not. By the end of the game, I would frequently have single guns that were worth more than their entire net worth. There was only one vendor I found that had enough money to deal with my more valuable loot. I stopped looting for the most part because it was just too tedious to sell it all, and the game's economy is so busted that I didn't need the money anyway. There's a skill you can get to amend this issue, but it'd be better if it just wasn't an issue at all. Lastly, why can't I sell guns at the clothes store? Okay, I know that this contradicts what I was saying before about convenience, but bear with me here for a second. I'm actually fine with this one on the surface because of the convenience factor, but what I'm not fine with is that same vendor turning around and adding that gun to their sales inventory. The clothes store is selling guns now because some random explorer sold him one. Does he have a permit to sell firearms? Is every store in this game a pawn shop? This one is wildly inconsistent too. Occasionally you'll find vendors that will only buy certain kinds of items, but others will take anything regardless of what they're selling themselves. What's the rule here? What should I as a player be expecting from this? Do you think the gun store will take this OJ off my hands? Nah, they probably can't afford it. After I finished bankrupting the city's vendors and destroying the economy by hoarding all the wealth like a true American, I decided to head up to the Eye and have a chat with Vlad. The Eye is a satellite station around New Atlantis, and Vlad is a Constellation member that mans it. He spends his time searching the stars for signs of funny rocks. Vlad tells me that another Constellation member, Andreja, was looking for a rock, but he hasn't heard from her for a while. He asks me to go look for her. I found Andreja in a cave where we collected a funny rock, although Andreja refused to go near it for some reason. She didn't actually refuse, mind you, her NPC was just incapable of going into the cave. Why doesn't Andreja pick up the funny rock? So far, only Barrett and I have seen visions after touching them, so the rest of Constellation isn't certain that the visions are even real. If the cosmic brain cancer isn't a concern, then wouldn't it make sense to have more people touch the rocks in order to confirm that the visions are real so we can try to figure out what they mean? Andreja would have touched the rock if I wasn't there. There's no reason for her not to just because I am. Andreja and I dropped off the funny rock in the floating machine. Then I told Andreja to leave me alone forever. Mateo let me know he also went looking for a rock, but came up empty-handed because he isn't the main character, and is therefore incapable of contributing in any meaningful way. Vlad gave us a phone call and asked me to come meet him back at the Eye. Wait, he called us? Like, from the Eye? Okay, so long-distance communication is possible, but only when Bethesda feels like using it? I don't understand. It's very inconsistent. Vlad let me know he found an anomaly bigger than a funny rock and asked me to check it out. I ventured out to one of the nicer looking planets in the game, which isn't a compliment, where I discovered an ominous temple. It appeared to have been locked up for quite some time, but it opened up to me, presumably because I've touched the funny rocks. Inside, I found a mostly empty room with a large, oscillating shape in the middle, surrounded by an anti-gravity field. After chasing down some shiny spots in the room, the oscillating rings formed into a circle. I flew into the middle of it, and all the stars seemed to coalesce on my body, after which I was treated to another brain blast before being teleported outside. After all this, I unlocked a new power. I gained the ability to generate an anti-gravity field on command, which doesn't seem to actually do anything. I tried putting one beneath my feet to break my fall, but it didn't work. That makes sense though, since that's not how zero gravity works, so fair enough. Then I tried jumping while in the middle of the field to see if it would allow me to float, and it didn't. So what the hell? This power doesn't even do anything! Cosmic brain cancer sucks, man! The chemotherapy powers are useless! Okay, so apparently this power only works on enemies. If you use it on an enemy, they'll start floating around and they'll be unable to fight back. I'm trying to figure out Bethesda's line of thinking here. They gave me a power that only works on enemies, but didn't think to put some enemies outside for me to try it on. There's a little prompt on screen for you to give the power a try, but they're giving you this prompt knowing you won't even be able to see its effects. This is supposed to be a pretty big moment. I just unlocked some mystical star power that no one's ever seen before, and it couldn't be more underwhelming. After this, I headed out to see if I could nab another power. Vlad detected a similar energy source to the one that gave me my first one. I shot off to some unknown planet and found another temple that looks exactly like the last one and did the exact same chasing stars and zero gravity thing. Every time you get a new power, you do this song and dance. It's the same every time, so you would think that Bethesda would make sure that the cutscene you're going to watch 24 times at least plays out properly, but no. There's a disjointed frame when it transitions from first to third person, and this happens every time you get a power, and it drove me crazy. This time I got the ability to generate a space of atmosphere full of oxygen for my precious lungs. This is another power that I never really found a use for, but it has more utility than the anti-gravity field, so I'll give it a pass. I decided it was time to get back on track and picked up another one of Sarah's missions. This time I needed to go find Barrett, who went radio silent after picking me up from the mines. I headed back there where my old boss explained that Barrett had gotten himself captured after the mine was attacked by pirates. I tracked down Barrett, who was sitting down for a leisurely chat with his captors, and used Persuasion to convince the captain to let Barrett go free, and then we just left. Okay, credit where credit is due. Like I said earlier, Persuasion is actually super useful throughout this game. In this instance, it allowed me to avoid paying the ransom that the pirates were looking for or getting into a firefight with them. That's great. I love that a skill I'm investing points into actually has an impact on the flow of the game. That being said, why did the pirates just let us go? There's no benefit to this decision. They gained nothing by doing this. In fact, they actually lost way more than they gained because Barrett caused their ship to crash on the way here, and I killed all the guys they had stationed outside. Then they just let us walk away, scot-free. The only real explanation for this is the fact that Barrett and the pirate captain had become really friendly with each other before I got there. But unless they got so friendly that they were planning their next date, this is still a terrible reason. It just makes the pirates look weak and incompetent. It especially looks bad for the captain as the decision maker. What are his men going to think of him after this magnificent display of leadership? The captain even says himself that the fact that they get along isn't a reason to let him go. These guys aren't one-piece pirates. There's no reason for them to be this accommodating. I really appreciate how useful Persuasion was here, but I should not have been able to persuade them to let us go this easily. Persuading the captain should have led to a reduced ransom payment, or it should have allowed me to tell him that I killed all of his pirates outside, leading him to be scared to get into a firefight with me. Some extra dialogue tree that wouldn't have existed if I didn't persuade him. Hell, this could have made sense if they established through dialogue that these guys are amateur pirates that don't really know what they're doing. Then their complete and utter incompetence at least makes some sense. But these guys are Crimson Fleet, and I happen to know that they don't just let any amateur join their ranks. After dropping off Barrett at Constellation, I introduced myself to Adam Jensen, I mean Sam Coe. He's a character that exists. The other members of Constellation are a bit more fleshed out than Sam. Sarah is the brave and decisive leader, Mateo has a spark in his eye for any discoveries, Noelle is timid but intelligent, Andresa has a chip on her shoulder but she's doing her best to contribute, Walter is a bit curmudgeonly but ultimately caring and wise, Vlad's kindness betrays the fact that he used to be a big-time pirate, Barrett is cocky and brazen but there to help when you need him, and Vasco is annoying. When it comes to Sam though, I struggle to think of any real character traits that he has. His character seems to be person who is in a family. He's got a daughter that he carts all over the galaxy, he doesn't get along with his dad, and I think he's divorced, but as an individual, I don't know, he's a guy. He's pretty flat. This may come as a shock to some people, but having a family is not a character trait. All of the dialogue in Starfield is really awkward, boring, and uncomfortable. It often feels like the lines are written out of order and no one checked to make sure that they flowed together well in actual conversation. I talked to this guy once who was surprised I came to talk to him.
I just didn't expect our visitor from the outside to stop by and chat with me.
But 2 seconds later, he tells me he was forewarned I'd be coming to see him.
Oh yeah, she sent me a message. I have everything for you right here.
So which is it? Did you not expect me to talk to you, or did you know that I would be? It feels like these lines had to be written at completely different times. This kind of thing happens more frequently than it should. Sometimes characters will just straight up repeat themselves as if you didn't just hear something from them.
I was drifting in and out.
The awkward dialogue really stuck out to me with Sam specifically because it feels like he's bored of the conversation every time you speak to him.
After Planetfall, Solomon spent years mapping Akila, and he found a tiny little patch of nothing on his sensors. The kind of nothing an artifact produces.
I believe this is a result of how little he's fleshed out as a character. He's not witty like Barrett, there's none of Mateo's innocent excitement, he doesn't carry Sarah's optimistic confidence, he just speaks very plainly. There's no attachment to what he's saying, he's just saying what he's supposed to say. Now another reason that this really stuck out with me with Sam in particular is that I've played Deus Ex. I've heard Adam Jensen. I know what Elias Toufexis, who voices both of these characters, is capable of. He's not a bad voice actor by any measure, he's actually quite good. And this leads me to believe that a lot of Starfield's dialogue issues come down to a lack of good direction, not a lack of good talent. Barrett's voice actor, Barry Wiggins, does the best job he can with what he's given, and yet all the jokey, witty lines he's delivering fall completely flat.
You're amazing. Like chocolate-covered prasada berries on an all-you-can-eat spicy chunks buffet. Sorry, I'm a little hungry.
This is true across the entire game. There are lines that are supposed to be funny, supposed to get a chuckle out of you, but the way they're delivered completely kills any momentum the joke might have had.
And if you wake up in the middle of the night to find me standing over you, taking scans or drawing blood, just take it in stride. I'm kidding, I wouldn't do that. Probably.
I still haven't given up on getting Sarah to re-enlist.
It's a game we play. He asks, I say no.
It's not just comedy either. Dialogue in this game just lacks weight. Nothing is particularly impactful or meaningful. There are no lines of dialogue in this game that will give you goosebumps or have you clenching your controller or get you on the edge of your seat. It's all just so meh. But again, I'm not blaming the voice actors for this. This problem is so prevalent across the entire game that it just reeks of bad writing and direction.
Have you ever wondered what I'm doing in the months between uploads? Well, if you are a Patreon member, you would know. Patreon subscribers get weekly updates, early access to new videos, behind-the-scenes streams, special written reviews, and more for the low price of just $5 a month. Joining the Patreon is the best way to support the channel, and it allows me to do a lot of things that make my videos better, so come on by if you want to take a peek behind the curtain. If you can't afford the Patreon but still want to show the channel some support, hitting the like button goes a really long way to showing YouTube that people want to see this stuff, so I really appreciate that. Thank you, and back to the video.
Sam the Wooden Man and I headed for his home planet of Akila to hunt down an artifact. We landed at the aptly named Akila City, the capital of the Freestar Collective. I like Akila a lot more than New Atlantis. It's got this interesting sci-fi western vibe that I really dig. The narrow walking paths and the way the city weaves together like a maze creates the illusion that the city is much larger than it actually is. Considering Akila City is the capital city of a major faction in the universe, you would expect it to feel more established than it does. It kind of feels like it popped up in the last couple of years and they haven't finished cleaning it up from the construction. Where New Atlantis is green, Akila City is gray. The city looks pretty washed out. Color-wise, I think it looks fine, but the gray filter brings down the contrast too much. It ends up feeling very hazy. Bringing it into Premiere, I can bring the contrast back up without increasing the saturation, and it looks much better. The city looks nicer at night when the gray seems to be toned down. I love the interior spaces of Akila City. They have this rustic industrial design that I'm a huge fan of. They feel much more comfortable than the spaces in New Atlantis, and the design lends itself well to the sci-fi western vibe that the exterior conveys. Akila City is one of my favorite locations in the game for its visuals. Sam and I came here to meet with Sam's dad. Sam is the descendant of the founder of the Freestar Collective, and his father is the current governor of Akila City. Sam and his dad don't get along because Sam wanted to go out and become an explorer while his father wanted him to stay on Akila and succeed him as governor. We came to Akila to pick up a map left by Sam's ancestors that he believes could point us in the direction of a funny rock, but Daddy Dearest was one step ahead and he headed away despite Sam. We headed to Daddy's house where I instantly convinced him to give us the map by critically succeeding on a persuasion. Do you see the problem with this? You see how the critical success thing is stupid? Daddy refused to give his only son the map, but he's fine with giving it to me, a complete stranger, because I'm just so damn charming. Even though I've done absolutely nothing to earn that high level charisma. With Sam's daddy issues out of the way, we headed to the location of the rock and found a gang had posted up there, so we took them all out and took the rock. This time, not only did Sam not want to touch the rock, he specifically asked me to grab it. You know, for a bunch of explorers trying to discover the mysteries of the universe, these guys sure are a bunch of cowards. We headed back to New Atlantis to drop off the rock. You know, adding more rocks to our vaguely floating shape is supposed to be a pretty big deal. It's kind of the whole thing we're working towards. But apparently some people just don't take that very seriously because Barrett and Vasco decided to ignore what was happening and talk over everybody else I was trying to listen to.
There are 58 items on the reminder list.
That doesn't mean... Wait. Okay.
The fact that I can just toss a grenade at everybody and they all just go about their business is peak game design. Actually, this is pretty common across the whole game. While I was on Akila, I dealt with a little bank robbery negotiation. The robbers told me,
"Hands where I can see them, and don't try nothing."
So what did I do? Well, I pulled out my gun and started firing at the bank as I walked up to the door. Apparently that's not considered trying anything because they didn't have any reaction to it. I'm from America and this is totally normal. All of you Europeans with your gun safety are just communist cowards, frankly. You can fire guns in public spaces and no one will react. You can fire a bullet right next to someone's head and they won't flinch. You can fire a couple shots when you are specifically asked not to, and there will never be any consequences for it. This is genuinely baffling. It is insane to me that a multi-million-dollar developer like Bethesda thinks they can get away with producing a game where the NPCs don't react to gunfire. Even worse, people defend them for it. I posted a short about this, and there were commenters that were genuinely upset that I called this out. They told me this doesn't matter, and that it's still a good game. They told me I'm nitpicking and that I should enjoy the game for what it is. You're the problem! You're why this happened! You dumbass dick-riding fanboys taught Bethesda that they can do whatever dumb shit they want, and people will call their game a masterpiece anyway. If you like Starfield despite the flaws I pointed out in this video, good on you. I'm happy for you. I'm glad you can enjoy it, genuinely. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with calling out lazy bullshit like this. We as the consumers need to hold developers to a higher standard, because if we don't, they do what Bethesda did here. Bethesda knew there was a sizable chunk of their audience that wouldn't care about this, so they didn't bother to do it. This is them testing the waters to see how much they can get away with, and that's when you know it isn't a passion project anymore. Todd did not set out to create his dream game with Starfield, no matter how many times he said it before its release. He set out to make a product, and he looked for any areas he could cut costs and increase profits, and this is one of them. NPCs reacting to player actions is not a new concept, it's been around for decades. Payday 2 released 10 years before Starfield, and the NPCs react when you shoot at them. Oh, but Payday 2 is a bank robbing game, of course they're going to. Starfield's not Payday 2, it doesn't have to do the same things. Do you realize how fucking stupid you sound? Do you have brain worms? NPCs reacted Payday 2 because they're designed to react like humans, not because it's a bank robbing game. This is a very basic game design concept, and a game like Starfield that's trying to immerse you in its world should be able to do something this basic. Sorry, I got kind of heated there. We are going to talk about this more later, believe me, but for now, let's move on. After hanging out with Sam, it was time for me and Walter to find a rock together. Everyone gets some time to hang out and help the main character, but don't expect them to get anything done without you around. And oh boy, let me tell you, this next rock mission is shockingly bad. I mean, it is unbelievably bad. When I was recording footage for this game, I wasn't sure if I actually wanted to make a video about it until I played this mission. It left me completely speechless, wondering how it ever made it off the drawing board, and it was right then and there that I knew I needed to talk about this game. Walter and I headed for Neon, where his company is headquartered. As a reminder, Walter is the CEO of a major shipbuilding company. Neon lies somewhere between New Atlantis and Akila City, in that I don't love it and I don't hate it. Neon has a cyberpunk design philosophy with bright lights and technology sticking out at you. If you've played Cyberpunk 2077, it doesn't hold a candle to Night City, but that's to be expected when one game is entirely dedicated to that aesthetic, and the other one is only dipping its toes in the water. But even for only dipping its toes, this feels very basic. It's got all the elements you'd expect from a cyberpunk city, but it lacks any truly memorable locations or landmarks. It feels as if the designers were just going down a list and checking off all the things that a cyberpunk city should have. The city feels really tiny even by Starfield standards. The entire location feels less like a city and more like an alleyway in a city. There's one long street that connects everything together and an outdoor space that lacks anything worth seeing. There's some concept art of Neon that makes it look like one entire city, complete with dozens of skyscrapers built under a dome, but in practice it feels more like you're hanging out on an oil rig. The funny thing is that they showed this concept art a ton throughout their marketing materials, almost as though they were embarrassed by the real thing. One way to have made Neon feel larger than it is and actually live up to it being a city would have been to model this entire massive city, then restrict the player to accessing a small chunk of it. Then the fact that this map feels like an alleyway would actually make sense, because it would be. Neon feels the most alive out of all the cities. There's a lot of citizens chattering as you're walking through, you'll pass by stores blaring music, you'll hear the sounds of an advertisement playing here and there, and the sound of machinery fills the whole city with noise. The city is just as dead as New Atlantis ultimately, but the sound design fills it with life in a way that New Atlantis doesn't. Walter and I are here because Walter set up a meeting with a thief that managed to steal a funny rock. We do a little negotiating and to get our hands on it, but on our way out, we're stopped by an agent working for the original owner of the rock. He is not too happy about the theft and wants the rock back. The original owner is the CEO of a rival shipbuilding company. We tell the agent to fuck off and start to head off planet until we hit a roadblock. Neon is a pretty corrupt place, and the CEO bribed the police to impound my ship so we can't leave. So, seeing no other way to deal with this, Walter and I headed for the company's office, which is in the same building as Walter's company's office, which only makes the city feel even smaller. We talk to his receptionist, who tells us that the CEO doesn't want to meet with us. I try to persuade her to let us through anyway, but it doesn't work. How does this make sense? Does he want the rock back or not? Because if he does, I don't know how he expects me to give it back to him without being able to meet with him. It's not like I can leave with the receptionist. Luckily, there was an executive level access card sitting out in the open, completely unguarded, so I stole it and took the elevator up. The CEO caught onto our tricks and trapped us in the elevator, but luckily Walter's wife was able to get around security measures and help us move through the building to reach him. She gave us instructions on where to go along the way, and even though I followed her instructions exactly, I still got caught somehow.
Go down to yours to the door. Security is on full alert.
So with no other options, we had to fight our way to the CEO's office. That means killing all of his security guards and all of the innocent, unarmed employees who are just doing their jobs. Now, to be clear, the employees weren't fighting back, so I had no reason to kill them, but I knew I had to anyway. Why? Well, I needed to see if anybody would condemn my actions. Would Walter tell me to stop and remind me that we're not here to hurt people? Would I get a bounty for killing a bunch of innocent civilians? Would Sarah kick me out of Constellation for doing something so heinous and unnecessary? The answer is, of course, a resounding no. Are you fucking kidding me? Walter and I just walked into an office and shot up the building and nobody cares? That's just an okay thing to do? I know we're getting pretty used to this kind of thing in the US, but that doesn't make it okay. Where are the consequences for your actions? Where is the moral dilemma? Where is there any impact from your actions in this entire fucking game? Great job, Todd. You really knocked it out of the park this time. Really brought us back to the days of RPG past. Really built an immersive fucking experience for me to stick my dick into. This is a main story mission. This is supposed to be the most important and most complete part of the entire game. How did this conversation happen at Bethesda? Hey Todd, we wrote this section where you go into a public office and kill all the employees. Well, what happens when you do? Nothing, boss. We didn't think about that. That's fine. Go work on making new Atlantis green. Fuck you! I shouldn't have to explain this stuff, but if you want your players' actions to have weight and have meaning and make your game worth playing, then you need to create a cause and effect for their actions. Hunt monsters, get sick weapons, solve a puzzle, unlock the next puzzle, shoot up an office. Nothing! There's no effect! There's only cause! And it's causing me to have an aneurysm! Ah! I know someone with a Starfield profile picture is going to point out that this mission took place in Neon, which is, again, a pretty corrupt place, but use your brain for a second. You and I both know that's not an excuse. There is no excuse for this. Even if the police didn't care, someone should have. This is just bad. Walt and I made our way to the CEO's office where he tells us to hand over the rock. I refuse, and he just kind of accepts that I'm not going to give it to him. Walter and him decide on some vague partnership between their companies, and the CEO tells me he wants me to decide what to do with the guy that stole it. You know the guy we bought it from? Yeah, he got caught and now he's bleeding out in the CEO's office. We have the option to kill him, let him go, or hand him over to the authorities. Walter decides to chime in and let me know that we should spare his life because it's the right thing to do, as if we didn't just kill a bunch of innocent office workers together. I decide he should go to jail, and he makes some passing comments about how only some people have to face justice. And you know what? He's totally right. This is bullshit. Why are we even talking about jail for this guy after what I just did? Nah, see, the real mistake this guy made was not being the main character. That's when the rules stop applying. And for the icing on top of this shit cake, the CEO lets us go with the rock.
You're free to leave.
Time to go. Let's talk more back at the ship.
This was my genuine reaction to this. I just couldn't process what I'd just been through. I was in a state of disbelief. We stole this guy's rock and killed all his workers, and all he wants from us as recompense is to decide the fate of some thief I have no attachment to? This is absurd. This makes absolutely no sense. The CEO got absolutely nothing out of this exchange except for some extremely vague agreement to do business with Walter. What was the point of all of this? The cherry on top is the choice I'm given. This is a false choice, and it's one of many throughout this game. In fact, I'd say the majority of the choices you can make in this game are false choices. We have three options here: send the guy to jail, kill him, or let him go. But if we take a second to look at the cause and effect, you'll quickly realize that there are three causes and one effect. This decision doesn't impact how the quest ends. It doesn't impact whether or not you get the rock. It does absolutely nothing. If this was an actual choice you were making, there would be repercussions for it. If you sent him to jail, he could come back after serving his sentence to get revenge on you. If you let him go, he could come in handy to complete an objective later in the game. If you kill him, a mission that he could have helped you with would be more difficult because you can't turn in for assistance. Events like that give your choices weight in a game like this because there's an actual impact to your decisions. I don't believe that every choice in a game like this needs to have repercussions later down the line because there's just too many choices to make. It's okay to have some choices that have no consequences, choices that only exist to challenge your morals as a player and allow you to do a bit of role playing. The problem with Starfield is that virtually every choice is a false choice. There are no consequences for any of your decisions, and the more you realize how little your choices matter, the more apathetic you become about making them. Why should I care about the choices I'm making if the game doesn't? On the rare occasion where there are consequences, they're extraordinarily minor. In this case, the only potential impact this decision could have is that it can affect your affinity with your companions. But Walter isn't one of the companions it can affect, so since I travel alone, this whole situation was completely meaningless. If whether or not Sarah likes it is the only consequence Bethesda could come up with, then they're just not very creative. You could say that the point of this choice is to challenge your morals by asking you what you think should happen in a situation like this, but I have no connection to this guy or what happens to him. If I don't feel that decision weighing on my conscience because I don't care about him, then it doesn't work as a moral challenge either. This goes back to what I said earlier at the beginning of the game about joining Constellation. Don't ask me a question if there's only one answer, and don't give me a choice if there's only one result. There are 3 choices here, but only one result. All roads lead to never seeing this guy again, and that's just not very impactful. On our way off Neon, Walter says,
"All in all, a great success. Thank you for allowing."
Yeah, that's what I think every time I shoot up an office too. Once we made it into orbit, we were confronted by a strange-looking starship. The pilot threatens us to hand over the rocks. I ask who they are, and...
We are the Starborn, and you...
Fucking... When I was streaming this game, one of my chatters told me that you become Starborn, and I thought they were joking because it was so stupid. You got fancy Starborn powers. One of them lets you send people flying. Kinda reminds me of some other game. I swear Bethesda forgot how to come up with new ideas after 2011. We refused to hand over the rock and grab jump away from the Starborn. Even though Bethesda knew Walter would want to chat after the jump, they still made sure the police would talk over him.
Scan complete. You are clear to land at New Atlantis.
We headed back to New Atlantis where the whole team had a little meeting to discuss the Starborn. Barrett thinks they're aliens while Mateo believes they're some envoy of the heavens. In any case, it's decided that we don't have enough info and that we should keep collecting the rocks. Finally, it was Barrett's turn to tag along on a mission with the hero. Him and I headed out to meet with an eccentric collector who got his hands on a rock. I managed to convince the collector to show us the rock, and once he led us to it, we needed to find a way to convince him to give it to us. Our options are to shoot him or... No, that's it. You can only shoot him. I looked this up to make sure I was right, and it's possible to sneak your way to the artifact and grab it undetected, but the moment you do, the entire ship goes on alert even though you weren't caught grabbing it. So your options are to shoot him right away, shoot him after talking for a bit, shoot him once he brings you to it, or shoot him after you grab it. No matter what you choose, you have to shoot him until he surrenders and lets you leave with the rock. I don't understand. I had Barrett with me. Barrett is the most charismatic character in the entire game. He managed to befriend his kidnappers. Why can't I get Barrett to distract the collector for a bit while I stuff the rock in my pockets? And don't even tell me it's because the rock is too big. You all know how much OJ I've got in these pockets. Boy, I hope there's a compelling reason for why I can't resolve this peacefully and not something stupid. It's something stupid. I used my most persuasive bullet to get the rock. The collector wasn't too happy about this order of events, so even though we got the rock, he made sure to contact the police about the theft, and I ended up with the bounty. We returned to the lodge, but it was immediately clear that something was wrong. Noel was trying desperately to get through to Vlad on the eye. When he finally responded, he told us that he was attacked by a Starborn and that Sam was badly injured. He then told us to prepare ourselves because the Starborn was headed our way. I was given the option at this point to stay and protect the lodge or to head straight for the eye and check in on them. I decided I'd head for the eye because I figured I might be able to run into the Starborn before they got to us and cut them off. But as I was heading out, Walter was attacked by something. I went to check on him because I actually kind of like Walter, and I found him being held hostage by an invisible man. I found myself face to face with the Hunter, and he... Oh wait, I've met this guy. Anyway, he's the Starborn that attacked the eye. He used a bunch of Starborn powers like the ones I have and realized he was too strong to stop, so he ran away. We ran through New Atlantis fighting the Hunter along the way as we caused destruction. All of a sudden, all the NPCs are really afraid of all the gunfire. Almost as if they're all paid actors following a script and not real people with genuine reactions. Everyone piled onto my ship and we escaped New Atlantis. The Hunter followed us but decided to let us go because he's impressed that I was able to hold him back. I actually dig this because when I first met the Hunter back at the beginning of the game, he made it pretty clear that he respects strength. So this is totally in line with his character. Unlike the last Starborn I met, he encouraged me to keep hunting for the rocks. He told me that in doing so, I might be able to grasp unity, whatever that is. We made a beeline for the Eye to check on everyone, but unfortunately we arrived a little too late.
Dad, come on. You have to keep your eyes
Sam?
open.
Come on, Sam. Talk to me.
Yeah, Rip.
Sam didn't make it. Everyone else was injured but okay, and this death had no emotional impact. The game didn't do a good job of setting up Sam as someone I should care about. The only really sad part is knowing that Cora, Sam's daughter, lost her dad. And she blames me for his death, which, I mean, there's 7 other people in Constellation and a tin can, but whatever. It's decided that since the Starborn are after the rocks, we're going to store them on my ship from now on since I'm the main character and I can't die. I mean, I did collect literally all but 2 of them, so this is pretty justified. Who cares if Sam dies, really? I probably would have found the rock he helped me out with anyway. Between Vlad and I, we have no problem sniffing these things out. I headed back to New Atlantis, but on my way into the city, I saw a police officer and decided I should get the bounty the collector gave me taken care of. Strangely though, when I talked to him, he told me he had special orders to bring me in. Next thing I knew, I was in an interrogation room. Normally when you get a bounty in a Bethesda game, you get arrested and put in jail. You don't get interrogated. You can also pay a fine and you'll be released immediately, so I knew this was weird. My interrogator was the commander of UC System Defense. They're a special division of the United Colonies Navy that specializes in dealing with the Crimson Fleet, a notorious collective of space pirates. The reason they brought me in is that the commander wants me to act as an informant and infiltrate the Crimson Fleet in order to take them down. This is when the pieces finally fell into place. Bethesda is terrified that you will miss any content. This interrogation is the beginning of one of the faction questlines in Starfield, but the problem is that it requires you to get a bounty and get arrested to start. Bethesda was terrified that a player like me might make it through the entire game without ever getting a bounty because I'm just that good. So what did they do to make sure that I wouldn't miss this questline? Well, they wrote a main story mission where it's impossible to avoid getting a bounty. This is why you can't stealthily snatch the rock from the collector. This is why Barrett can't distract him while you grab it. It's because Todd needed to make sure the situation led to you getting a bounty. So you have to get in trouble for attacking the collector to get the rock, so you have to get arrested and find out that this questline exists. This is what we call railroading, and it sucks. Imagine how much cooler it would be to find out about this questline because your character is a career criminal, someone who ended up with a high bounty or someone who's been arrested multiple times. That would show you that the world is reacting to your actions. It would be organic and it would feel satisfying to have the actions you chose to do be recognized in some way. Instead, it doesn't matter how squeaky clean your record is, you will inevitably get arrested and asked to go undercover. Because I had never gotten a bounty before, I initially assumed that stealing the rock was what activated this questline, but I found out in New Game Plus that it's possible to start this questline early if you get a bounty in New Atlantis. And yet it somehow makes even less sense here. In this situation, I had just started the New Game Plus playthrough and I was stealing some ammo from a gun store because I didn't have much to work with. I got caught and the police immediately came and arrested me and took me to the commander. I literally just got this bounty and it's the first crime I've ever committed. How do they already have orders to take me to him? This is the equivalent of getting caught stealing a pack of gum, then being told you have to go undercover with the mafia. It's ridiculous. It should be possible and even okay to completely miss this questline. It should only be possible to do it if you rack up a particularly high bounty or end up with a bounty several times. But as I said earlier, Starfield isn't designed to be played multiple times. So they need to make sure you're going to see everything the first time. And we're not done talking about this, but for now, let's take a break from the main story and talk about faction questlines. So at the beginning of this video, I said I would cover all the updates Bethesda has made here at the end. Now, I wrote that with the assumption that Bethesda was going to make more substantial updates than they have, but as of now, they've been pretty minor. I don't feel the need to break down how they added FOV sliders or an actual map to the game. Some people might say those are day one features for most games. My response to all the updates they've made is that none of them are substantial enough to fix the problems I have.
If you're wondering what I think about any individual update, that is my response to all of them. The very basic structure of the game is the exact same as when I played it. The combat is still bland, the writing is still bad, the game is still boring. I don't foresee them fixing any of those things at this point, but please, prove me wrong. I would love to be wrong about that. Now for the all-important question, when is Part 2 coming out? Well, if you join the Patreon, you can watch it right now! Patreon members get early access to new videos, and they already have access to Part 2, so head on over if you want to see that right now. It's just $5 a month and gets you lots of other good things too. But if you can't afford that, Part 2 is coming out in 2 weeks, so I'll see you then. I want to give a huge shout out to all my Patreon members, especially my gamers, True, The Unmatched Power of the Sun, and Lucy Ray here, and all of my Sims, A Yellow Line, Marzak, Belgara, Bill Nye the Bounty Guy, David D, Degenerate Matsugen, Jimmy B, Skippy, Ninja Des, Remy Nerd, and Ryan Hosford. You all make it easier to do what I do, and I deeply appreciate the support. See you in Part 2, everyone.